The gunshots rang out like thunder, splitting the air as Wynona Burke dove behind an upturned wagon, dragging the bleeding man beside her. Dust caked her face and the hem of her skirt was torn, but her grip remained firm on both her Winchester rifle and the stranger's arm as they took shelter from the hail of bullets that splintered the wood around them. The year was 1873, and Wasco, California was supposed to have been just another stop on Wynona's journey west. Instead, she found herself in the middle of what locals were calling the bloodiest shootout the small settlement had seen in years. "Stay with me," she whispered urgently to the wounded cowboy, his blood seeping through the makeshift bandage she'd tied around his thigh. His face was pale beneath the layer of trail dust, but his eyes, a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin, remained alert despite the pain. "You should run," he managed through gritted teeth, his hat long gone and dark hair falling across his forehead. "They'll kill you too if they find you with me." Wynona checked her rifle, counting the remaining bullets. 5. Not nearly enough if those outlaws decided to rush their position. "I'm not leaving you behind," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Now hush and save your strength, Mr. Xander," he supplied, wincing as he shifted his injured leg. "Xander Hayes." Another volley of bullets struck the wagon, sending splinters flying. Wynona ducked lower, pulling Xander down with her. In the distance, she could hear men shouting, their voices growing closer. "Those men," she whispered, peering cautiously around the edge of the wagon, "they're coming back." "How many are there?" "4," Xander said, his breathing labored. "The Blackwater Gang. Been after me since I interrupted their train robbery 2 days ago." He attempted to sit up straighter, reaching for the Colt revolver still holstered at his side. "I managed to shoot one before they got me in the leg." Wynona nodded, formulating a plan. She was the daughter of a trapper who taught her to shoot before she could properly write her name, and she'd been on her own since her father's passing 3 years ago. At 22, she'd learned that survival often meant making difficult choices. "We need to move," she decided, scanning the terrain behind them. There was a ravine about 50 yards back, leading to a cluster of rocks and scrub brush that might provide better cover. "Can you walk at all?" Xander's jaw tightened. With help. The shouting grew louder, and Wynona knew they were running out of time. "On 3, she said, positioning herself beside him. 1, 2, she didn't wait for 3, pulling Xander up with surprising strength for her slender frame. He bit back a groan as he leaned heavily against her, and together they began making their way toward the ravine, moving as quickly as his injury would allow. They'd barely made it 20 yards when a voice called out behind them. "I see him. They're making a run for it." Wynona didn't look back. "Faster," she urged, practically dragging Xander now as his strength began to fail. The ravine was still too far and the outlaws were gaining ground. "Leave me," Xander gasped, stumbling. "You can still make it." "Not happening," Wynona said through clenched teeth, her arm aching from supporting his weight. The sound of hoofbeats approached rapidly from behind, and she knew they weren't going to outrun their pursuers. Making a split-second decision, she veered toward a small depression in the ground, partially hidden by sagebrush. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. With a final burst of effort, she half-guided, half-pushed Xander down into the shallow ditch, following immediately after and positioning herself protectively in front of him, rifle at the ready. The riders thundered past, not noticing their hiding place in their haste to reach the ravine. Wynona held her breath, counting 4 men on horseback, just as Xander had said. They rode to the edge of the ravine and dismounted, weapons drawn as they began searching the area. "They'll double back soon," she whispered, turning to check on Xander. His face had grown even paler and fresh blood was seeping through the bandage. "You're a good shot," he murmured, nodding toward her rifle. "5 bullets. 4 men." Wynona shook her head. "Not from this distance and not with them spread out like that. We'd be dead before I got the second one." Xander's eyes were beginning to lose focus. "Then we're in trouble." "No," Wynona said firmly, thinking quickly. "We're going to wait until dark. It's only a few hours away. Then we'll make our way to my horse. I left her tied up behind the general store in town." "Town's 3 miles," Xander pointed out weakly. "We'll make it," she insisted, though uncertainty gnawed at her. The wound in his leg needed proper attention, and she wasn't sure how much longer he could go without treatment. But the alternative was certain death at the hands of the Blackwater Gang. As the afternoon wore on, Wynona kept watch while Xander drifted in and out of consciousness. She tightened his bandage and gave him water from the small canteen at her belt, all the while listening to the movements of the outlaws, who had set up a makeshift camp near the ravine, clearly intending to wait them out. The sun was beginning to set when Xander stirred again, his eyes clearer than they had been for hours. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "Risking your life for a stranger." Wynona considered the question. "My pa always said character is what you do when no one's watching," she replied softly. "I couldn't live with myself if I'd just ridden away and left you to die." Xander studied her face in the fading light. "You're not like most people I've met." "I'll take that as a compliment," she said with a small smile, then grew serious again. "Night's coming. We need to be ready to move as soon as it's dark enough." The waiting was excruciating. Every sound seemed magnified: the crickets chirping, the distant laughter of the outlaws around their campfire, Xander's increasingly labored breathing. When full darkness finally descended, Wynona helped Xander to his feet, supporting most of his weight as they began their slow journey back toward town. They moved painfully slowly, stopping frequently to rest and to listen for any sign of pursuit. Xander was fighting to stay conscious, his arm draped heavily across Wynona's shoulders. They had gone perhaps half a mile when he stumbled, nearly bringing them both down. "I can't," he gasped, pain evident in every line of his face. "You have to go on without me." "I told you before," Wynona said firmly, "I'm not leaving you behind." Xander's eyes found hers in the moonlight. "Why are you so stubborn?" Despite the dire situation, Wynona felt a smile tug at her lips. "Family trait, now come on," one foot in front of the other. They continued their arduous journey through the night, the miles stretching endlessly before them. Xander grew heavier against her side, and Wynona's muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to stop. When they finally glimpsed the scattered lights of Wasco in the distance, she nearly wept with relief. "We're almost there," she encouraged, but Xander didn't respond. His head had fallen forward, and she realized with alarm that he had lost consciousness entirely. Summoning strength she didn't know she possessed, Wynona half carried, half dragged him the remaining distance to the edge of town. The streets were deserted at this late hour, most of the buildings dark except for the saloon, from which spilled light, music, and raucous laughter. Wynona headed for the small livery stable instead, hoping to find help there without drawing too much attention. To her relief, the stable boy was still awake, tending to a new arrival of horses. His eyes widened when he saw them. "Miss Burke." "What in tarnation?" "I need your help, Tommy," Wynona cut in. "This man's been shot. The Blackwater Gang is after him." Tommy's young face paled at the mention of the notorious Outlaws, but he hurried forward to help her with Xander. Together, they managed to get him into an empty stall layered with fresh straw. "We can't stay here," Wynona said, checking Xander's wound in the dim lantern light. Once they realize we've doubled back to town, this is the first place they'll look." "Doc Miller's out of town," Tommy informed her anxiously. "Went to deliver the Henderson baby out at their homestead. Won't be back till morning." Wynona bit her lip, thinking rapidly. "Is old man Wilson still living in that cabin up by Coyote Creek?" Tommy nodded. "About 4 miles north." "He don't take kindly to visitors, though." "He'll take kindly to the gold pieces I'll give him," Wynona said grimly. "Can you hitch up a wagon? And I need medical supplies, clean bandages, whiskey, anything you can find." While Tommy hurried to prepare a wagon, Wynona tended to Xander as best she could. The bullet was still lodged in his thigh, and infection was a real concern. His skin was hot to the touch, suggesting fever had already set in. "Don't you dare die on me now," she murmured, bathing his face with a damp cloth. "Not after all the trouble I've gone to." Within 20 minutes, Tommy had returned with a small wagon and a bundle of supplies. "Got some bandages from Mrs. Peterson next door," he said. "And a bottle of whiskey from the saloon. Told him it was for a toothache." "You're a good boy, Tommy," Wynona said gratefully, helping him load Xander into the back of the wagon. She covered him with a blanket and climbed up onto the driver's seat. "If anyone comes looking for us, never saw you," Tommy finished, handing her the reins. "Be careful, Miss Burke." Wynona nodded, then flicked the reins and set the horses in motion. She kept to the back roads, avoiding the main street of Wasco entirely. The journey to Wilson's cabin seemed to take an eternity, every jolt of the wagon making her wince in sympathy for Xander. Old man Wilson was, as expected, less than pleased to be roused from his sleep by a pounding on his door. But the sight of gold coins and Wynona's desperate explanation of their situation eventually softened his weathered face. "Bring him in," he grunted, stepping aside. "Ain't no doctor, but I dug enough bullets out of men during the war to know what I'm doing." The next hour was a blur of activity as Wilson extracted the bullet from Xander's leg while Wynona assisted, holding him down when necessary and wiping away the blood. Xander remained mercifully unconscious throughout the procedure, only stirring when Wilson began stitching the wound closed. "He's lost a lot of blood," Wilson observed as he finished his work. "But the bullet didn't hit anything vital. If infection don't set in, he might just pull through." "Thank you," Wynona said sincerely, her hands and dress stained with Xander's blood. "We can't stay long. There are men after him." Wilson's bushy eyebrows rose. "The law, outlaws, the Blackwater Gang." The old man whistled low. "You picked a dangerous friend, girl." "He's not my friend," Wynona said automatically, then paused. After everything they'd been through in the past day, perhaps that wasn't entirely true anymore. "We only just met, but he's a good man, I think." Wilson studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a small back room. "You can stay tonight. Got a root cellar if trouble comes, but you'll need to be gone by first light." Wynona thanked him again and settled into a chair beside the cot where Xander lay. His color was marginally better, and his breathing had steadied. She allowed herself to relax slightly for the first time since the shooting had begun. The night passed without incident, though Wynona barely slept, keeping vigil over Xander and startling at every sound outside the cabin. As dawn broke, he finally opened his eyes, blinking in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Safe for the moment," Wynona replied, offering him water from a tin cup. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," Xander admitted with a weak attempt at a smile. He drank the water gratefully, then caught sight of her blood-stained dress and hands. "You saved my life." Wynona shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "We're not out of danger yet. We need to leave soon." Xander struggled to sit up, wincing sharply at the pain in his leg. "The Blackwater Gang won't give up easily. They're not just after me because I interrupted their robbery. I saw something I shouldn't have." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then met her eyes directly. "I recognized one of them. A man named Porter. He used to ride with the law in Arizona territory. If word gets out that he's now running with the Blackwater Gang, it would raise a lot of questions," Wynona finished, understanding dawning. "Questions that could lead back to other crimes." Xander nodded grimly. "Porter will kill to keep his secret, and the rest of the gang will help him because they don't want to lose their inside man." The gravity of their situation settled heavily on Wynona's shoulders. This wasn't just about escaping immediate danger. The Blackwater Gang would hunt them relentlessly as long as Xander lived to tell what he'd seen. Wilson entered the room, carrying a tray with bowls of simple porridge. "Sun's up," he announced gruffly. "You two need to be moving on." Heard riders passing in the night heading back toward town. Wynona and Xander exchanged alarmed glances. "They must have realized we doubled back," she said, "if they're asking questions in Wasco." "Tommy wouldn't talk," she added, more to reassure herself than anything. "But someone might have seen us at the livery." "We can't put Wilson in danger," Xander said, attempting again to sit up. This time he managed it, though his face paled with the effort. "We need to go." "You ain't going nowhere fast on that leg, boy," Wilson pointed out practically. "But I might have an idea." He disappeared into another room, returning moments later with a folded map, which he spread out on the small table. "There's an old mining camp here," he said, pointing to a spot in the foothills about 20 miles east. "Abandoned now, but the cabins are still standing. Remote enough that you'd be hard to find, and there's good visibility of the approaches." Xander studied the map, then nodded slowly. "It could work. Give me time to heal before we try to reach the marshal in Sacramento." Wynona frowned. "Sacramento is over 100 miles from here." "It's the nearest federal marshal," Xander explained. "This isn't just a local matter anymore. Porter has connections with lawmen across 3 territories. We need someone with federal authority who can't be bought." The plan made sense, but Wynona couldn't help feeling that her involvement was growing far beyond what she'd anticipated when she first pulled Xander behind that wagon. She had been on her way to San Francisco, where a position as a schoolteacher awaited her a chance at a respectable life after years of wandering following her father's death. As if reading her thoughts, Xander reached out and touched her hand. "I understand if you want to go your own way now. You've done more than enough already." Wynona looked down at his hand on hers, then at his face still pale but determined, those blue eyes earnest. Something shifted inside her, a certainty that she couldn't leave him now, not just because of the danger but because something else was taking root, something she wasn't quite ready to examine. "I said I wouldn't leave you behind," she replied simply. "I meant it." They departed Wilson's cabin an hour later, Xander lying in the back of the wagon beneath a cover of burlap sacks and hay, Wynona driving with her rifle across her lap. Wilson had provided them with enough supplies to last several days, steadfastly refusing additional payment beyond the gold pieces she'd already given him. "Just don't get yourself killed," he told her gruffly as they left. "And maybe stop by sometime when you ain't being chased by killers." The journey to the abandoned mining camp was tense, every approaching rider or distant dust cloud causing Wynona to tighten her grip on the reins and reach for her rifle. But they encountered no one who showed any interest in them, and by late afternoon they were climbing into the foothills, the road becoming little more than a rough trail. The mining camp appeared suddenly around a bend, a cluster of weathered wooden structures nestled against the hillside, silent and seemingly untouched since its abandonment. Wynona guided the wagon to the largest of the cabins, which still had most of its roof intact. "Home, sweet home," she murmured, setting the brake and climbing down. She helped Xander from his hiding place, supporting him as they made their way inside the cabin. The interior was dusty but surprisingly sound, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and even a bed frame with the remnants of a straw mattress. Wynona helped Xander to sit on a bench while she explored the rest of the camp, returning with an armload of relatively clean bedding she'd found in one of the other cabins. "It's not the Palmer House Hotel," she said as she made up the bed, "but it will do." Xander watched her work, his expression thoughtful. "You're remarkable, you know that. Most people would have ridden in the other direction at the first sign of trouble." Wynona shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," Xander said softly. "You're doing what very few would do, and I haven't properly thanked you yet." She busied herself arranging their supplies, avoiding his gaze. "No need. I couldn't just thank you," he interrupted, his voice low and sincere. "For not leaving me behind, for risking your life for a stranger. I won't forget it." Wynona finally met his eyes, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun streaming through the cabin's lone window. "You're welcome," she said simply. The next few days fell into a pattern as they settled into the abandoned mining camp. Wynona tended to Xander's wound, which was healing cleanly thanks to Wilson's skilled care. She hunted for fresh meat, explored the surrounding area to ensure they were truly alone, and kept watch for any sign of pursuit. Xander's strength returned gradually. By the fourth day, he was able to walk short distances with the aid of a makeshift crutch Wynona had fashioned from a tree branch. They spent the evenings by the fire, talking long into the night as they came to know one another beyond the circumstances that had thrown them together. She learned that Xander was 30 years old, born in Boston but drawn west after the war, in which he'd served as a cavalry officer. He'd worked as a lawman in Arizona Territory before becoming a Wells Fargo agent, tasked with investigating a series of train robberies, which was how he'd encountered the Blackwater Gang. In turn, Wynona told him about growing up with her father in the mountains of Colorado, learning to trap and hunt and survive in the wilderness. About her mother's death when she was just a child, and her father's passing 3 years earlier from pneumonia. About her dreams of a more settled life, her journey west to take the teaching position in San Francisco. "You'd make a good teacher," Xander commented one evening as they shared a rabbit stew Wynona had prepared. "You're patient and determined." "Stubborn, you mean," she replied with a smile. "That too." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled back, and Wynona found herself noticing other details about him, the strong line of his jaw beneath the beard that had grown in during their time in hiding. The way his hands were both strong and gentle when he helped her with chores despite his injury. The deep timbre of his voice when he spoke quietly in the firelight. She caught herself watching him more often than was necessary, and sometimes turned to find his gaze already on her, thoughtful and warm. There was a growing ease between them, a comfort in each other's company that belied the short time they'd known one another. On the 7th day, as Xander sat outside the cabin cleaning his revolver while Wynona mended a tear in her dress, he broke a comfortable silence with an unexpected question. "What will you do after, when this is over and we've reached Sacramento?" Wynona's needle paused mid-stitch as she considered. She hadn't thought much beyond their immediate situation, beyond keeping them both alive and helping Xander heal. "Continue to San Francisco, I suppose, if they'll still have me as a teacher. I'm already weeks late." Xander nodded, his focus on the gun part spread before him. "It's a good city. You'll like it there." Something in his tone made Wynona look up, trying to read his expression. "What about you? Will you go back to working for Wells Fargo? Possibly. He reassembled the revolver with practiced movements. Or I might head further north. Oregon, maybe. I've heard the Willamette Valley is beautiful. Good land for ranching. Wynona tried to imagine Xander as a rancher, settled in one place with cattle and crops and a permanent home. Somehow it fit. There was a steadiness to him, a reliability that would serve him well in such a life. I've never seen the ocean, she found herself saying. That's one reason I chose San Francisco. My father always promised to take me, but we never made it that far west. Xander looked up, meeting her eyes. It's something, the first time you see it. Makes a person feel small, but in a good way. Puts things in perspective. He hesitated, then added, I'd like to show it to you someday. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Wynona's heart beat faster, and she busied herself with her sewing again, though her fingers had grown clumsy. Perhaps you will, she replied softly, not looking up. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching the camp. Xander was on his feet instantly, his injury forgotten as he grabbed his gun and moved to the cabin door. Get inside, he ordered, all trace of the previous gentleness gone from his voice. And get your rifle. Wynona didn't waste time arguing. She hurried into the cabin, retrieving her Winchester from where it stood by the bed. Through the window, she counted 4 riders coming up the trail, the same 4 men who had been hunting them since that day in Wasco. How did they find us? She whispered as Xander joined her inside, his face grim. Doesn't matter now. What matters is getting out of this alive. He checked his ammunition, then gave her a steady look. I won't ask you to fight my battles, Wynona. Good, because I wouldn't listen anyway, she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. Besides, they're my battles too now. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before his expression hardened again. There's a back window. If we can make it to those rocks on the ridge, we'll have better cover and the high ground. Wynona nodded, already calculating the distance about 100 yards across open ground before reaching the shelter of the rocks. With Xander's injury slowing them down, it would be a dangerous dash. The riders had reached the edge of the camp now. Through the window, Wynona could see them dismounting, spreading out as they approached the cabins. One of them, a tall man with a distinctive red bandana, gestured toward the main cabin where fresh bootprints in the dust betrayed their presence. That's Porter, Xander murmured. The one I recognized. Wynona tightened her grip on the rifle. We need to move. Now. They slipped out the back window just as the outlaws reached the front door. Xander moved with remarkable speed despite his wounded leg, driven by the urgency of their situation. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the ridge when a shout went up behind them. There they are, back of the camp. Gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet as they ran. Wynona returned fire over her shoulder, not aiming to hit but hoping to slow their pursuers. Xander stumbled once, and she caught his arm, steadying him as they continued their desperate flight toward the rocks. They reached the ridge just as Wynona's rifle clicked empty. Diving behind the largest boulder, they pressed their backs against the cool stone, breathing hard. Xander peered around the edge, then ducked back as another volley of bullets struck nearby. They're coming up, he reported grimly. 2 on each side trying to flank us. Wynona checked her pockets, finding 3 more rifle cartridges. I'm almost out. Xander handed her his revolver. 6 shots. Make them count. He still had his knife, a long, wicked-looking blade that had been hidden in his boot. The odds were overwhelmingly against them, and they both knew it. 4 armed men against the 2 of them, with limited ammunition and nowhere to run. Wynona felt a curious calm settle over her, the kind that comes with accepting the inevitable. Xander, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "I don't regret it, any of it." He understood what she wasn't saying. His hand found hers, squeezing tightly. "Neither do I." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the chaos of their situation receding. Then the moment was shattered by a voice calling from below. "Hayes, we know you're up there with the woman. There's no way out." Xander's jaw tightened. "Porter," he muttered. "Throw down your weapons and maybe we'll let the lady live," Porter continued, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Otherwise, you're both dead where you stand." Wynona met Xander's eyes again, reading the conflict there. "Don't even think about it," she warned. "They won't let either of us walk away." "I know," he said heavily, "but I'm not seeing many options here." Before either of them could say more, a new sound reached them, horses approaching, many of them, coming fast from the direction of the main trail. The outlaws below had heard it too. Wynona could hear their confused shouts and hurried confronts. "Riders coming," one of them called to Porter. "At least 10, maybe more. It could be more of their gang," Wynona whispered, though hope had begun to rise in her chest. Xander shook his head, listening intently. "No, listen to the rhythm. Those are cavalry horses." As if to confirm his words, a bugle call split the air and a commanding voice shouted, "This is the United States Cavalry. Drop your weapons and surrender." The ensuing chaos was brief but intense. Two of the outlaws attempted to flee, only to be cut down in a hail of gunfire. Porter and the remaining gang member dropped their weapons, raising their hands as blue uniformed soldiers surrounded them. Xander cautiously stood, keeping Wynona behind him as he called out, "Up here? We're friendly." A young lieutenant looked up, shading his eyes against the sun. "Identify yourself." Xander Hayes, Wells Fargo agent, and Miss Wynona Burke. The lieutenant nodded, gesturing for them to come down. As they made their careful way down from the ridge, Wynona supporting Xander on the steep parts, she whispered, "How did they find us?" Xander looked equally mystified. "I have no idea." Their question was answered as they reached the bottom of the ridge, where a familiar figure stepped forward from among the soldiers, Old Man Wilson, looking decidedly uncomfortable on horseback, but undeniably pleased with himself. "Figured you two might need some help," he said by way of greeting. "When these boys stopped at my cabin asking about outlaws in the area, I put 2 and 2 together and brought him straight here." The lieutenant approached, introducing himself as Lieutenant James Howard. "We've been tracking the Blackwater Gang for weeks," he explained. "They've been responsible for a series of robberies throughout the territory. When Mr. Wilson here mentioned you might have information about a lawman riding with them, we knew we had to find you." Xander gestured toward Porter, who glared at him with undisguised hatred. "That's your man. Former deputy marshal from Prescott, Arizona. Been feeding the gang information about shipments and patrols for at least a year, from what I gathered." Lieutenant Howard looked grim. "We suspected as much, but couldn't prove it. Your testimony will be crucial in bringing him to justice." As the soldiers secured the prisoners and prepared to depart, Wynona found herself standing slightly apart, watching the activity with a strange sense of displacement. It was over so suddenly, the danger that had defined her existence for the past week and a half gone in an instant. She should have felt only relief, but instead there was an odd hollowness, a sense that something was ending before it had properly begun. Xander limped to her side, his expression mirroring her own conflicted feelings. "They'll escort us to Sacramento," he said quietly. "You'll be safe there and can continue on to San Francisco if you still want to." "If I still want to," Wynona repeated, searching his face. "And if I don't," his eyes, those startling blue eyes that had first caught her attention when he was bleeding and afraid, held hers steadily. Then maybe we could talk about that valley in Oregon I mentioned, about seeing the ocean together. Wynona's heart leapt at his words, but caution held her back. We've only known each other a short time, Xander, under extreme circumstances. I know. He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. And I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see if what I feel for you is as real in peacetime as it is in war. And what do you feel? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Xander's gaze never wavered. That you're the bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. That I've never felt more alive than these past days with you, even with a bullet in my leg and outlaws on our trail. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. That I think I could love you, Wynona Burke, if you'd let me try. The world seemed to still around them, the bustle of soldiers and prisoners fading into the background as Wynona absorbed his words. She thought of the teaching position waiting in San Francisco, of the life she'd planned for herself, safe, respectable, predictable. And then she thought of Xander, of the connection that had formed between them in fire and blood and quiet conversations by firelight. I think, she said finally, a smile beginning to curve her lips, that Oregon sounds beautiful this time of year. The journey to Sacramento took 4 days, the cavalry escort ensuring their safety all the way. Porter and the surviving member of the Blackwater Gang rode bound and under heavy guard, their fate sealed by Xander's testimony, and the evidence found among their possessions, including several letters that implicated Porter in crimes stretching back years. Wynona and Xander traveled in a wagon provided by the Army, their time filled with conversations about the future, about possibilities, about dreams long deferred. By the time they reached the city, with its bustling streets and imposing government buildings, they had formed a tentative plan, one that involved a telegram to San Francisco declining the teaching position, and passage north to Portland, once Xander had given his official statement to the federal marshal. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Xander's reputation as a Wells Fargo agent lent weight to his testimony, and within 3 days, Porter and his accomplice were formally charged and remanded to federal custody to await trial. The marshal, a grizzled man named Holt, personally thanked them for their role in bringing down the notorious gang. The reward money will be substantial, he informed them as they prepared to leave his office. Should be enough to give you two a good start, wherever you're headed. Xander smiled, his hand finding Wynona's. Oregon, he said. We're going to Oregon. They departed Sacramento on a riverboat heading north, the first leg of their journey to the Willamette Valley. Standing at the rail as the city receded behind them, Wynona felt an unexpected lightness, as if she'd set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. Having second thoughts? Xander asked, joining her at the rail. She shook her head, turning to face him. No, just marveling at how quickly life can change. 2 weeks ago, I'd never even heard of Xander Hayes. He smiled, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. And I'd never imagined someone like Wynona Burke existed, someone who would risk everything for a stranger. Not a stranger anymore, she said softly. No, he agreed, his hand cupping her cheek. Not a stranger at all. When he kissed her, it felt both inevitable and surprising, like the culmination of a journey that had begun the moment she'd pulled him behind that wagon in Wasco. Wynona leaned into him, her arms encircling his waist, anchoring herself to this man who had come to mean so much in so little time. Thank you, he whispered against her lips, for not leaving me behind. 3 months later, Wynona stood on the porch of a small but sturdy cabin, watching the sunset paint the Willamette Valley in shades of gold and crimson. The property, 40 acres of good land with a creek running through it, had been purchased with the reward money from the Blackwater Gang's capture. Already, a small herd of cattle grazed in the pasture, and the foundation had been laid for a larger house to replace the cabin when their means allowed. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention, and she shaded her eyes to see Xander returning from town, his tall figure silhouetted against the evening sky. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, just as it had every day since that first desperate encounter. He dismounted with ease, his injured leg now fully healed, and climbed the porch steps to join her. "Mail came in," he announced, producing several letters from his saddlebag, "including one for you, all the way from California." Wynona took the envelope, recognizing Old Man Wilson's shaky handwriting. She opened it eagerly, reading aloud for Xander's benefit. Wilson wrote of Wasco, of the changes in the town since their departure, of the small fame that had attached to his name after his role in bringing down the Blackwater Gang. He ended with an invitation for them to visit someday, when you ain't being chased by killers. "We should go," Xander said, leaning against the porch railing. "When the ranch is more established, pay our respects to the man who helped save our lives." "I'd like that," Wynona agreed, folding the letter carefully. "Though I have to say I don't miss being shot at." Xander laughed, pulling her into his arms. "No, not even a little. It was rather exciting," she swatted his chest playfully. "There are other kinds of excitement, Mr. Hayes." "Indeed there are, Mrs. Hayes," he murmured, his voice dropping to the low tone that never failed to send shivers down her spine. The gold band on her finger caught the last rays of the setting sun as she reached up to touch his face. They had married in Portland a month after arriving in Oregon, a small ceremony with only a few witnesses, the beginning of their life together, officially on paper what had already been true in their hearts. "I have news," Wynona said softly, her hand dropping to rest on her still flat stomach. "News that might change our plans for building the big house sooner rather than later." Xander's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. "Are you sure?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her at his expression of wonder. "The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday. Come spring, there'll be 3 of us on this ranch." His whoop of delight echoed across the valley as he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down gently, suddenly mindful of her condition. "A baby," he breathed, his hand joining hers over her stomach. "Our child." The magnitude of it struck Wynona anew as she saw her own happiness reflected in Xander's eyes. From that desperate moment behind the wagon in Wasco to this peaceful evening in Oregon, their journey had been unlikely, dangerous, beautiful. She thought of all the small choices that had led them here, her decision not to ride away when bullets were flying, his determination to protect her even when he could barely stand, their mutual leap of faith in choosing a future together. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of all they'd been through, all they'd become to one another. Xander's answer was in his kiss, tender and reverent, in the way his arms encircled her as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above their home. They stood together on the porch long after night had fallen, talking quietly of the future, of the child that would join them, of the life they were building day by day. And when Xander whispered once more, "Thank you for not leaving me behind," Wynona knew with absolute certainty that she never would. Spring brought not only wildflowers to the meadows surrounding their homestead, but also their son, a healthy boy with Xander's blue eyes and Wynona's determined spirit. They named him Wilson Hayes, in honor of the curmudgeonly old man who had saved their lives in more ways than one. As the years passed, their ranch prospered. The small herd of cattle grew, and they added horses, including several fine breeding mares that Xander trained himself. The larger house was built by the time their daughter, Elizabeth, arrived 2 years after Wilson. And when twins, Samuel and Sarah, joined the family 3 years later, they added yet another wing to accommodate their growing brood. Wynona found that motherhood suited her as well as ranch life. She taught all 4 children to read and write at home before they were old enough to attend the small schoolhouse that had been built in the nearby town. In the evenings, she would often tell them stories of her adventures with their father, carefully edited for young ears but no less exciting for the omissions. "Tell us again how you saved Papa from the bad men," Wilson would beg, his eyes wide with admiration for the mother he sometimes forgot was once a woman alone in the world, making her way west with nothing but determination and a Winchester rifle. And Wynona would smile, catching Xander's eye across the room as she began the tale that had become family legend. "It was a hot day in California, and I was just passing through a little town called Wasco." They did return to Wasco eventually when Wilson was 10 and the twins were 5. Old man Wilson, now in his 80s, but still stubbornly independent, welcomed them to his cabin with gruff affection, presenting each child with a hand-carved wooden animal and regaling them with increasingly embellished versions of their parents' heroic escape. The town had grown since they'd last seen it, the railroad having brought prosperity and new settlers. No one recognized Xander and Wynona, which suited them fine. They were different people now anyway, no longer the wounded cowboy and the solitary woman, but partners in every sense, tempered by love and time, and the shared work of building a life together. On their last night in Wasco, they visited the spot where they had first met, now marked by a new general store where the upturned wagon had once provided their shelter. Standing there in the twilight, Xander took Wynona's hand, just as he had countless times over the years. "Do you ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what would have happened if you'd kept riding that day? If you'd never stopped when the shooting started?" Wynona considered the question seriously, as was her way. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I might have had that teaching position in San Francisco. Lived a quieter life, perhaps. Do you regret it? The choice you made?" She turned to face him fully, this man who had been her husband for over a decade now, who had fathered her children and shared her bed and her dreams and her sorrows. The years had added lines around his eyes and threads of silver at his temples, but he was still the same Xander who had looked at her with gratitude and wonder when she refused to leave him behind. "Not for a single moment," she said with absolute conviction. "Every choice I've made since that day has led me exactly where I was meant to be." Xander's smile was tender as he drew her close. "I thank God every day for your stubbornness, Wynona Hayes." She laughed softly against his chest. "Family trait, remember? Our children come by it honestly." They returned to Oregon with renewed appreciation for the life they'd built together. The ranch continued to thrive, and as their children grew, so did their legacy in the valley. Wilson showed a gift for working with horses that matched his father's, while Elizabeth's quick mind and love of books reminded everyone of Wynona in her quieter moments. The twins, always inseparable, developed complementary skills, Samuel with a talent for figures that made him the natural choice for managing the business side of the ranch, and Sarah with an artist's eye and a gentle way with even the most skittish animals. When Wilson turned 18, he announced his intention to attend the university in Portland, the first Hayes to seek higher education. Though it meant his absence from the ranch, Xander and Wynona supported his decision wholeheartedly, proud of the man their firstborn was becoming. The evening after they'd put Wilson on the train to Portland, Wynona found Xander sitting on the porch of their home, gazing out at the land that had been their sanctuary for nearly 2 decades. She settled beside him, her hand finding his in the comfortable gesture that had become second nature. "He'll be fine," she assured him, knowing the source of the pensive look on her husband's face. "Wilson has your courage and my common sense." Xander chuckled, squeezing her hand. "God help him, then." They sat in companionable silence as the sun set over their property, painting the sky in brilliant hues that never failed to take Wynona's breath away, even after all these years. The ranch hands had gone home for the day, and the children were inside, Elizabeth reading to the twins before bedtime. "I've been thinking," Xander said finally, "about that promise I made you long ago, about showing you the ocean." Wynona looked at him in surprise. With the demands of the ranch and raising 4 children, their travels had been limited to necessary trips to Portland and their one journey back to Wasco. "That was a lifetime ago. I know, and yet I never forgot it." He turned to her, his eyes as blue and earnest as they had been when he'd first spoken of the Willamette Valley and possibilities. "The children are older now. Elizabeth is more than capable of managing things for a week or 2. I think it's time we kept that promise." The idea of it, of seeing the vast Pacific, of having time alone with Xander away from the constant demands of their life, filled Wynona with unexpected longing. "When?" "Next month, before the fall roundup. We'll take the train to Astoria, stay at that hotel overlooking the Columbia where it meets the ocean." His expression grew tender. "It's long overdue, don't you think?" Wynona leaned over to kiss him, a gesture that had lost none of its sweetness over the years. "I think, Xander Hayes, that you still know how to surprise me after all this time." They made the journey as planned, leaving the ranch in Elizabeth's capable hands and traveling west to where the continent met the endless expanse of the Pacific. Standing on the beach for the first time, Wynona understood what Xander had meant all those years ago about the ocean making a person feel small in a good way. The vastness of it, the eternal rhythm of the waves, the knowledge that it had existed long before them and would continue long after they were gone, it put everything in perspective. "It's magnificent," she breathed, her hand tight in Xander's as the wind whipped her hair around her face. "More than I imagined." Xander watched her reaction with evident pleasure. "Worth the wait." "Yes," she said, turning to smile at him, "though I wouldn't have traded a moment of what came between." They spent a week in Astoria, walking the beaches, exploring the town, and simply enjoying the luxury of time together without responsibilities pulling them in different directions. In their hotel room overlooking the water, they rediscovered each other in ways that reminded Wynona of their early days together, when every touch had been a revelation. On their last evening, as they sat on the hotel's veranda watching the sun sink toward the horizon, Xander produced a small box from his pocket. "What's this?" Wynona asked, taking it curiously. "Open it and see." Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When she pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal a miniature painting on one side, the view of their ranch from the hill behind their house, rendered with exquisite detail, despite its size. The other side held an equally small but perfect rendering of the ocean as seen from their hotel window. "I had it commissioned before we left," Xander explained as she stared at it in wonder. "The artist worked from a photograph of the ranch, and I described the ocean view as best I could. Then I had him finish it here, while you were resting yesterday afternoon." Tears pricked at Wynona's eyes as she realized the significance of the gift, her 2 lives, united in one precious object. "It's beautiful," she whispered, closing the locket gently and holding it out so Xander could fasten it around her neck. "Thank you." He brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Happy anniversary, my love." Wynona blinked in confusion. "Our anniversary isn't until—" She stopped, understanding dawning. "Today is the day we met." Xander nodded, his expression soft with memory. 20 years ago today, you pulled a wounded stranger behind a wagon and refused to leave him behind. And my life has never been the same since. The realization that he had remembered, had counted the days and planned this entire journey to coincide with that anniversary, filled Wynona with such love that words seemed inadequate. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him, putting all her feelings into the gesture. When they finally parted, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he murmured, echoing words spoken 2 decades earlier, "for not leaving me behind." And Wynona, her heart as full as it had ever been, knew with absolute certainty that she never would. They returned to their ranch renewed, carrying the memory of the ocean with them as they resumed the rhythm of their lives. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Wilson completed his studies and returned to the valley, not to the family ranch but to establish a law practice in the growing town nearby. Elizabeth, to everyone's surprise, fell in love with a cattle buyer from Texas and moved south with him, though she returned often with their children in tow. The twins remained closest to home, Samuel building a house on the northern edge of the Hayes property for his wife and their son, while Sarah, who never married, converted the original cabin into a studio where she painted landscapes that eventually found their way to galleries in Portland and beyond. Xander and Wynona watched it all from the home they had built together, their partnership deepening with each passing year. They weathered difficult seasons, drought years that threatened the ranch, Xander's injury when a spooked horse threw him against a fence post, the winter Wynona fell ill with pneumonia that left her weakened for months afterward. But through it all, they remained each other's constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. As they entered their 60s, they began to step back from the daily operations of the ranch, gradually handing responsibilities over to Samuel and his son, now a capable young man of 20. This gave them time for other pursuits. Wynona finally opened the small school she had once dreamed of, teaching the children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders in a room added to their house for that purpose. Xander, whose skill with horses had never diminished, began breeding and training a line of horses that became known throughout the territory for their intelligence and steady temperament. They also traveled more, making good on long-deferred dreams to see more of the country they had crossed as younger people. They visited the Grand Canyon, its vastness reminding them of their first sight of the ocean. They journeyed east to Boston, where Xander showed Wynona the city of his birth, so different from the western landscapes that had become their home. And they returned to Wasco one last time, finding Old Man Wilson's grave and standing in silent gratitude for the crusty benefactor, who had played such a pivotal role in their story. On the 50th anniversary of their meeting, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It was Wilson who proposed the toast, raising his glass to his parents with the eloquence that had made him a respected attorney. "To my mother and father," he said, his voice carrying across the tables set up in the yard, "who taught us all what it means to stand by someone when it would be easier to walk away. Who built not just a ranch but a legacy of courage, loyalty, and love that will outlast all of us." Wynona, her hand in Xander's as always, felt tears well in her eyes as she looked around at the family they had created, their 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and even 1 great-grandchild, a baby girl born to Wilson's eldest daughter just 3 months earlier. So much life, so much love, all stemming from that single moment of decision behind a wagon in a dusty California town. Later, as twilight settled over the land and the younger generations continued the celebration, Xander led Wynona away from the noise, up to the hilltop where they had often walked together over the years. Age had slowed their steps but not dimmed the connection between them, evident in the way they moved in perfect understanding, each adjusting to the other's pace without need for words. From this vantage point, they could see the entire ranch spread out below them, the main house with its many additions, the barns and corrals, the pastures where cattle and horses grazed, the creek running silver in the fading light. Beyond, the valley stretched toward distant mountains, and further still, though invisible from here, lay the ocean they had first seen together 29 years before. 50 years, Wynona marveled, her voice soft with wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I heard those first gunshots in Wasco. Xander's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her close against his side. And sometimes it feels like we've always been here, like all of this has always existed. She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Do you ever regret it? Any of it? It was the same question she had asked him that day in Wasco when they'd returned. But now it encompassed so much more, a lifetime of choices, challenges, joys, and sorrows shared. Xander turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. The years had silvered his hair and deepened the lines around his eyes, but those eyes themselves remained as blue and clear as the day they'd met. And they still looked at her with the same mixture of reverence and wonder that never failed to make her heart skip. Not a single moment, he said, echoing her own words from long ago. Every choice I've made since that day has led me exactly where I was meant to be. Wynona smiled, recognizing her own declaration returned to her. With me, she supplied softly. With you, he confirmed, bending to kiss her with the tenderness that had only grown with the passing decades. Always with you, Wynona Hayes. They stood together on the hilltop until the first stars appeared, talking quietly of memories and moments that had shaped their shared life. And when they finally made their way back down to rejoin their family, they walked as they always had, side by side, hand in hand, neither one ever leaving the other behind.